What if a single moment of assumed ignorance could shatter everything you thought you knew about someone? Billionaire whispered in Arabic, thinking the waitress wouldn't understand. Her reply shocked him. The amber glow of the corner cafe cast long shadows across the worn wooden tables as 42-year-old businessman David Chen adjusted his silk tie and whispered harshly into his phone. "This woman understands nothing. We can speak freely." His eyes glanced dismissively at the waitress refilling water glasses nearby. Her simple uniform and quiet demeanor suggesting she was just another invisible service worker in his world of high-stakes deals. But 35-year-old Ila had heard every word and her heart clenched as memories of her late father's voice echoed in her mind, speaking those same flowing Arabic syllables that had lullabied her to sleep as a child. She'd spent years hiding her heritage, but something about this man's arrogance ignited a flame she'd long kept buried. "Where are you watching from tonight?" On Emotion Waves. The Riverside Cafe had been Ila's sanctuary for 3 years now, a place where she could blend into the background and earn an honest living while she pursued her evening law classes. The regular customers knew her as the quiet girl with kind eyes who never forgot how they liked their coffee. But none suspected that beneath her gentle exterior lay a brilliant mind, fluent in 4 languages and armed with a pre-law degree from community college. She'd learned early in life that sometimes survival meant making herself small, invisible, unremarkable. David Chen represented everything. She'd grown to quietly resent about her wealthy clientele. He arrived every Tuesday at precisely 6:30, demanded the corner table with the best view, and treated the staff like furniture. His tailored suits probably cost more than she made in 6 months, and his phone conversations always seemed to revolve around numbers, with more zeros than she could fathom. He was the type of man who'd inherited his father's shipping empire and mistook good fortune for personal superiority. Tonight felt different, though. David's usual composure seemed strained as he hunched over his phone, speaking in rapid Arabic to what sounded like a frustrated business partner. "The project is in danger. These Americans don't understand the market complexities." His voice carried an edge of desperation that Ila had never heard before. As she moved between tables, her trained ear caught fragments of a conversation about a failing construction deal, angry investors, and a looming deadline that could destroy his reputation. Despite her resentment toward his arrogance, something in his tone reminded her of her own father during those final months, when medical bills threatened to consume everything they'd worked for. It was the sound of a proud man watching his world crumble. Can you imagine overhearing a secret that could change lives? Stay tuned on Emotion Waves. The cafe buzzed with its usual evening crowd, elderly couples sharing quiet dinners, college students hunched over textbooks, a few business people grabbing quick meals before heading home. The familiar sounds of clinking dishes and gentle conversation created a warm backdrop that usually brought comfort. But tonight, she felt an electric tension building as David's conversation grew more heated. "We need a quick solution, or we'll lose everything." His knuckles whitened as he gripped the phone, and for the first time since she'd known him, Ila saw fear flicker across his face. Whatever empire he'd built was apparently teetering on the edge of collapse, and his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. When David's business partner suggested something that made him sit up straighter, Ila found herself unconsciously slowing her movements to catch more of the conversation. Years of watching her immigrant parents navigate a world that often overlooked their intelligence had taught her to be observant, to listen not just to words, but to the emotions beneath them. Something significant was about to happen, and the subtle shift in David's body language told her that tonight's conversation would be different from all the others. As she approached his table to refill his coffee cup, she had no idea that the next few moments would change both their lives forever. David's conversation took a darker turn. As Ila lingered near his table, pretending to wipe down nearby surfaces, his voice dropped to an urgent whisper, but her years of listening to her grandmother's Arabic stories had trained her ear to catch even the softest syllables. "The plan is simple," We'll blame the local workers for the delays. Her hand still on the table she was cleaning. This wasn't just business stress. This was something far more troubling. Through the fragmented conversation, she began to piece together a picture of deliberate deception, of immigrant workers being set up to take the fall for construction delays that weren't their fault. Workers like her own uncle who'd spent decades building the city's skyline while being paid a fraction of what he deserved. The Americans will believe anything about foreign workers. David's laugh was cold, calculated. The coffee pot trembled slightly in Ila's hands as rage built in her chest. These weren't just abstract workers he was discussing. They were men and women who sent money home to feed their families, who worked twice as hard for half the recognition, who deserved better than being scapegoated by someone who'd never done an honest day's manual labor in his life. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, telling her stories of the dignity in all honest work, regardless of language or accent. Dignity isn't in what you own, but in how you treat others. It had been his favorite saying, passed down from her grandfather, who'd built bridges with his bare hands. David continued his scheming, outlining how legal documents could be manipulated to shift blame, how language barriers would prevent the workers from defending themselves effectively, and how the whole mess could disappear if they just found the right scapegoats. Each word felt like a knife twisting in Ila's chest, not just for the injustice of it, but for the casual cruelty with which he dismissed an entire group of people as expendable. The warm cafe lighting suddenly felt harsh and exposing around them. Other diners continued their peaceful meals, completely unaware that a man was plotting to destroy innocent lives, just tables away from their dessert conversations. Ila thought of her own family's struggles, of the countless nights her parents had worried about keeping their jobs, of the way her father had aged prematurely from the stress of being perpetually undervalued, despite his skills and education. This woman understands nothing. We can speak freely. David glanced at her dismissively as she approached his table, his assumption of her ignorance, the final insult in a conversation filled with them. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up on emotion waves. Something inside Ila snapped. The quiet, invisible waitress, who'd spent years biting her tongue and swallowing her pride, suddenly found her voice. Years of law school research had taught her about construction fraud, about worker rights, about the very laws David thought he could manipulate. As she set down his coffee refill, she made a decision that would change everything. The cup met the saucer with a soft clink. That seemed to echo through Ila's consciousness, like the starting bell of a boxing match. David barely looked up, so engrossed in his scheming that he didn't notice the fire building in the eyes of the woman he'd just dismissed as irrelevant. She cleared her throat softly, and when he finally glanced up with mild irritation, she spoke in perfect flowing Arabic that stopped his conversation mid-sentence. I apologize for the interruption, but I cannot stand by and listen to this. The color drained from David's face as if someone had pulled a plug. His phone slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering onto the table as his mouth opened and closed soundlessly. The arrogant businessman who'd just been plotting to destroy innocent lives looked like a child caught stealing cookies, his entire world tilting on its axis. You speak Arabic? He stammered in English, his voice barely above a whisper. Ila's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady, switching back to English with a slight accent that spoke of educated refinement rather than the simplicity he'd assumed. My father taught me that language is a bridge, not a weapon. He also taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by their position, but by their character. Around them, the cafe's gentle hum continued undisturbed, but at their small corner table, everything had changed. David's carefully constructed facade crumbled as he realized that his most intimate business secrets had been overheard and understood by someone he'd viewed as beneath his notice. His empire, built on assumptions and arrogance, suddenly felt as fragile as tissue paper. I don't understand, he said weakly, though they both knew he understood perfectly well. Those workers you're planning to blame, Ila continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. They have families, children, dreams. They work twice as hard for half the respect, and they deserve better than being sacrificed for your reputation. The weight of her words seemed to press down on David's shoulders, and for the first time in years, he saw himself through someone else's eyes, not as the successful businessman his mirror reflected, but as the man his actions revealed him to be. The shame of it was overwhelming, made worse by the fact that this revelation came from someone whose intelligence and dignity he'd completely overlooked. "My uncle works construction," Ila said softly, her anger tempered now by something deeper, disappointment in what humans could become when they forgot their connection to each other. "He's been building the city for 20 years. He deserves better than your scheme." David's breath came in short, shallow gasps as the full magnitude of his assumptions crashed down around him. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was about the kind of man he'd become, without even realizing it. Have you ever faced something like this? Let us know in the comments on Emotion Waves. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of truth. David stared at his hands, seeing them for the first time, not as tools of power, but as instruments that could either build up or tear down. The choice of what to do next would define not just his business, but his soul. The silence that followed. Ila's words felt like the pause before thunder, pregnant with the weight of revelation and choice. David's hands trembled as he reached for his phone, still open to the conversation that had revealed his true character. His business partner's voice crackled through the speaker, distant and impatient. "David, are you there? Did we lose connection?" For a moment, David stared at the device as if it were a foreign object. Then, with movements that seemed to surprise even himself, he lifted the phone and spoke in clear, deliberate Arabic. "The plan has changed. We won't blame anyone. I'll find another solution." The explosion of angry Arabic from his partner filled the air, but David simply ended the call and set the phone face down on the table. When he looked up at Ila, his eyes held something she hadn't expected. Not anger or embarrassment, but a profound sadness that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "My grandmother spoke Arabic," he said quietly. "She used to tell me stories about honor, about treating others with respect, regardless of their station. I haven't thought about those stories in 20 years. Ila felt her anger beginning to soften, replaced by something more complex. She could see the little boy he must have been, listening to his grandmother's wisdom, before the world taught him that power mattered more than principles. "What happened to those stories?" she asked gently. David's laugh was hollow, self-deprecating. "I forgot them somewhere between business school and believing my own press releases. I convinced myself that success justified everything, that people, like..." He stopped himself, the words dying in his throat as he realized what he'd almost said. "People like me," Ila finished, her voice free of accusation. "People you assumed were less educated, less valuable, less worthy of consideration." The accuracy of her words hit him like a physical blow. "Yes," he whispered, the admission seeming to cost him everything. "I'm sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry." Something shifted in the air between them. Ila pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just minutes before. "My father used to say that the moment you stop seeing people as individuals is the moment you lose your own humanity." David nodded slowly, understanding flooding his features. "Your father sounds like he was a wise man." "He was a construction foreman," Ila said, watching David's reaction carefully. "He built half the buildings in this downtown district, but most people never knew his name. He died 3 years ago, still believing that honest work and treating people fairly were the only currencies that really mattered." The transformation happening in David's face was remarkable to witness. Years of callousness seemed to be peeling away, revealing someone who had perhaps been buried but not destroyed. "I want to fix this," he said suddenly, the words tumbling out with desperate sincerity. "The project, the workers, everything. But I don't know how." If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel Emotion Waves for more heartwarming tales. Ila studied his face for a long moment, searching for any trace of manipulation or false sincerity. What she found instead was a man genuinely horrified by his own behavior, reaching for redemption he wasn't sure he deserved. Months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of the same corner cafe, but everything felt different now. Ila sat across from David at their usual table, not as waitress and customer, but as partners reviewing the final reports from the construction project that had nearly destroyed both their faith in humanity. The workers David had planned to scapegoat were not only cleared of all blame, but had received bonus payments and public recognition for their dedication and skill. "The building's ahead of schedule and under budget," David said, sliding the contractor's report across the table. "Your uncle's team found those structural inefficiencies that my engineers missed for months." Ila smiled, thinking of her uncle's pride. When David had personally apologized to him and the entire crew, offering them permanent positions with his company at significantly higher wages. He says, "You're different from other bosses he's worked for." "I had a good teacher," David replied, his eyes meeting hers with gratitude that had only deepened over the past months. Their friendship had grown slowly, built on mutual respect rather than assumptions. David had discovered that Ila's sharp legal mind and cultural insights were exactly what his company needed, while she had found in him a man genuinely committed to change. The cafe around them bustled with the same gentle energy it had always had, but now David saw the individuals rather than the backdrop. He knew Maria, the single mother working her way through nursing school, and always asked about her children. He'd learned that elderly Mr. Peterson had been a decorated veteran and that teenage Jake was saving money for art supplies. Each person had become real to him in a way they never had before. "I got the acceptance letter yesterday," Ila said, producing an envelope from her purse. "Full scholarship to law school." David's face lit up with genuine joy. "That's wonderful. You're going to be an incredible lawyer. I'll still work weekends here," she said, glancing around the cafe that had become more home than workplace. "This place taught me that every interaction matters, that you never know who's listening or what they might need to hear." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the morning crowd settle into their routines. David had learned to appreciate these quiet moments, to find peace in simplicity, rather than constantly chasing the next deal or acquisition. His grandmother's stories had returned to him gradually, brought back by conversations with Ila about heritage, family, and the values that transcend cultural boundaries. "Thank you," he said suddenly, "for seeing who I could become instead of just who I was." Ila reached across the table and briefly touched his hand. "My father always said that everyone deserves a chance to be better than their worst moment. You just needed someone to remind you of your best ones." As they gathered their papers and prepared to leave, David felt a completeness he hadn't experienced in years. The empire he'd built on assumptions and arrogance had been transformed into something meaningful, something that lifted others up rather than stepping on them. He'd learned that true success wasn't measured in zeros on a bank statement, but in the positive impact you had on individual lives. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more on Emotion Waves. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simple act of truly seeing the person standing right in front of you.